I'm just going to do a bit more of an introduction to the people we have on the panel today. We have Paula Ledieu from Science Commons. Paula is Director of Creative Commons International, and she's responsible for fostering the various localized versions of Creative Commons. Before working with Creative Commons, she was Project Director for the BBC's Creative Archive, which provides public access to the BBC's radio and television archive. Then we have Tom Chance, who's in his words, philosophy student, journalist, free culture hacker and activist. He's a free software and culture advocate and founded Remix Reading, which is a free culture, localized Creative Commons project which is aiming to make the sort of free culture and Creative Commons more applicable to non-geeks. I'm sure there's at least one non-geek in the room somewhere. Anywhere? And then we have Steve Coast from OpenStreetMap. He's just finished a physics degree at UCL and runs something more than a data analysis and visualization consultancy. So what we're going to do is just have a quick introduction to each of the projects that we're going to talk about, have a bit of a discussion, and then as soon as we can we'll get questions from you lot, so start thinking. Right, Paula.
To me. So I have to start by saying that after 2 days of me being in denial at the tapping sound in my computer, it finally slipped into a coma last night. So I'm doing this completely on the fly. All my cheat notes are locked on a hard drive that I can't get to, so I apologise in advance. As introduced, my name is Paula Ledieu. I'm the Director of Creative Commons International, which basically means that I work with a fantastic international group of volunteers, literally all over the world. We currently have 21 jurisdictions with local licenses and about another 20 in the pipeline. All up, we have about 70. Can somebody not hear me?
It would be a lot of
Yeah, okay. I hate these things, that's all. Is it live? Yeah. In all, we have about 70 jurisdictions that are currently in discussions to have their own local version of Creative Commons licenses and in their own language. So that's mainly what I do. I'm here today, however, to try and talk to you about a new project called Science Commons. And I say try because it requires a legal understanding, and I'm not a lawyer, and it also requires a scientific understanding, and I'm certainly not a scientist. So I'm going to sort of just literally introduce what Creative Commons is doing in the science space, and then hopefully when we move into sort of Q&A we can tease out a little bit more of the information, and if not I can point you to some fabulous resources that hopefully will be more informed than I am. So actually, who's heard of Creative Commons? Excellent. I love doing these kinds of audiences. Who actually uses Creative Commons to release material? Actually, that's pretty good too. And who has consumed material under Creative Commons license? Also very good. Excellent. So I don't need to explain Creative Commons to you. So Science Commons really is probably best described as a project that is specifically geared to taking some of the learning that Creative Commons has had in the cultural sphere and applying it specifically to the scientific domain. So it's certainly not about trying to make a new statement in terms of the work, the extraordinary amount of work that is going on in the scientific domain in terms of open access. Said some of the experience that Creative Commons has already had. So one of the really logical places that Science Commons project is starting is in the open access publishing sphere. Turns out that Creative Commons licenses are kind of handy in that sphere and meet the needs of a number of the manifestos and a number of the statements that have been made by various open access publishing groups. So one area that the Science Commons project, is really focusing on is open access publishing. But really that's simply about educating people about the availability of Creative Commons licenses, not much more than that. The other two areas that the Science Commons is particularly interested in is materials which I'll talk a little bit about, and data, which I'm not going to talk about at all, out of sheer fear of this audience and the appreciation that you will have, that your knowledge of the data space will be way, way more than mine. So I was hoping Rufus was actually going to make it, because this is one of Rufus' specialties.
Rufus headed off from Cambridge in a car at about 8:45. Okay, so he is on his way. I said I was taking the train. He said, no, we'll be there before you. You lied.
Dang, I was really counting on him to be able to sort of go, and over to Rufus for data. But I want to talk a little bit about materials, because for me, materials is a really, really interesting one. And what we mean by materials is literally access to processes, tools, procedures, and literally physical material. So things like DNA. How do you get access to DNA? And this is another area that John Wilbanks, who's actually the project lead for Science Commons, is particularly interested in as well. And I want to raise this as a sort of an interesting area, and one that intrigues me, because it's a sort of a domain, if you like, where there is an acute overlap between the digital and the physical. And where we're starting to see the physical being turned into digital materials in order to be able to be manipulated and used as part of a design process. Please come in if you need to. Okay. And so one of the things that we're looking at, obviously, is Creative Commons mainly focuses, as you know, in developing legal tools to try and facilitate movement and access to information, culture, fundamentally. But in the materials space, it becomes a very interesting exercise about how do you actually facilitate access to physical materials? How do you actually facilitate access to literally pieces of botanical materials from the Amazon that contain a critical ingredient, a critical piece of DNA that people want to be able to look at because they think that it might have a cure for, name your favourite disease. And increasingly we're starting to understand that the first step is actually about creating access to the databases that actually tell you where these materials are. So by and large, we sort of keep going back to the data problem again and again and again. I can really avoid that one. The other area that Science Commons is also very, very interested in, and this is care of John Wilbanks' background in the semantic web space, is about how we can start to think about building tools that allow different domains of information to be joined together. This is not, again, brain surgery in the sense that it's a new or novel idea, but what we're starting to become apparent is the need to have a level of interoperability at the legal level, as well as at the technical and the access levels. And so again, there's a real emphasis within the Science Commons project trying to develop things like standard clause in technology transfer agreements, such that when technology is transferred, for example, out of an academic sphere over to perhaps a commercial entity, that there are standard clauses in that mean that where that information has been stored in a database, perhaps in the academic sphere, people can still access that. They can still at least understand that it exists. And most importantly of all, they can do analysis against that piece of information, compare it to perhaps another database that has something that is perhaps correlated to that original piece. I really wish I had my slides. It really is so much easier to explain when I can point to pictures. So the sort of the Science Commons, perhaps in summary, is really trying to identify all of the breakdowns in being able to interoperate these bodies of knowledge. The emphasis is on the legal breakdowns, but also if you are familiar with sort of the layers of Creative Commons licensing, you'll be aware that we are very big on making sure that the legal is translated into a machine readable and also human readable. And again, Science Commons is taking that experience and trying to apply that to the science domain as well. So what we end up having is, yay! Hey Rufus! What we end up having is a sort of a three-pronged approach. How can we make the science domain as easily understood as Creative Commons has made it in the cultural domain? How can we make it so that machines actually understand what you can and can't do with different domains of knowledge? And then finally, how can we develop legally robust structures that keep the lawyers and the business folks happy? I'm so happy Rufus is here. I'm going to finish there. I think I've used my 5 minutes anyway, and Rufus can talk about data later on. Thank you for your time.
Well, that was very well timed. So I'd like to introduce Rufus Pollock, Director and Co-founder of the Open Knowledge Foundation, member of Creative Commons UK, and helps run an organisation called Friends of the Creative Domain. So, as you're here, you might as well talk and speak.
Do I need the mic? Is that a good idea?
There's some on the table, so.
If you wanted to sit.
Okay, that might be even better. Recover my breath. Not the free traffic of London. Yeah, so one of the things I'm here to announce is the launch of a kind of free culture group, which we kind of see as the kind of activist arm of Creative Commons. I mean, it's more than that, but that's one of its prime purposes, because I'm a member of Creative Commons UK, and they do an amazing job of the legal stuff. But one of the big things is like getting out there, getting the licenses used, and doing exciting projects around open content and cultural stuff. Because I'm here so late, I can't set up a laptop or show you the site or anything like that. But there are some campaigns on there. One is about local groups. One is Remix Reading, who Tom Chance, I believe, is going to speak about, which is a really interesting kind of community-based project, encouraging people to remix, reuse, and share work. The other item is actually a kind of more policy thing. It's a campaign about copyright term, which is normally quite a dull topic, but it's actually getting more exciting now because there's actual real threats that the copyright term in the UK is going to be extended by our Minister for Creative Industries, Mr. James Purnell, who's talking a lot with the MI, according to his missives he sends back to us. So that's a really concerning thing, because it's already the case that the public domain, does everyone here know the public domain is? Put up your hand if you know what public domain is. Wow, I'm talking to a really informed audience. Yeah, I mean, one of the really terrible things is the public domain is kind of, as it were, almost geriatric now. You know, whenever you get any material, it's so old. I mean, it's still amazing stuff, Shakespeare and Dickens and everything. But certainly when you talk to VJs, they don't want to remix works that are 80 years old. They want to remix stuff that's here and now, so they can actually engage with a living culture. And so one of our things is we're launching a campaign called 14+14 to return copyright to its original length, its original balance struck between rewarding creative work to encourage the production of works and access of the public and of other creators. And you can come and sign up to that, and even more importantly, add your testimony, add your views on this, because one of the things that constantly happens in this debate is that only one side is heard, basically. And that's why for 250 years, even 300 years, all you see is term extensions, all you see is copyright extensions of scope, length, everything else, because the massive public is just not heard. And even nowadays, the massive technology firms aren't even heard very effectively in these debates. So anyway, that project is important, I think, also because this space is often quite fragmented. I mean, I don't know how many people here are more of the kind of geek persuasion, as it were, as opposed to the kind of copyright activist persuasion. But is there a difference, Sometimes, like, I've just been doing stuff on software patents, and sometimes it's kind of weird because they love kind of, at least in selling it, they love copyright. Like, the more of it, the better, because at least it's not patents. Thank God. So I think one of the most important things is this kind of organisation hopes to kind of really collaborate. So if people have projects or stuff they're doing, we'd really like to kind of collaborate or participate, or they could join the network. It's quite a kind of free and open thing. It's like anyone can come along. In a way that Creative Commons has to be slightly more restricted because it's carrying a bigger kind of brand name and it's more about licenses and so on, and has to strike a middle way. So we hope to be a bit more on the kind of perhaps activist and I wouldn't say extreme, but issuing our demands more firmly side of things. So that's really exciting. You can log on at freeculture.org.uk. I don't think there's any testimony up because it only went live at 2 a.m. this morning. And I'm still praying that I haven't managed to test it since I got here on the Wi-Fi, so I'm praying it's still up. So if you come up to me afterwards and say, oh, the site's crashed, you know, I'll go shout at the Rails developer, you know, who helped do it. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know, I've got to think, is that my 5 minutes, I think, is up.
Right. So that segues quite nicely into Tom Chance, who can talk about Remix Reading.
Yeah, I'm going to stand because I dislike talking sit down, so I'll just lift this up.
This I think it's very much.
Mobile. Ahoy. So, yeah, I've basically been introduced twice now. I founded with a bunch of friends in Reading, Remix Reading, which is a community arts project. And our aim is essentially just to take it out of the geeky, lawyery sort of domain in which Creative Commons is, you know, cool and people say, oh, there are 10 million documents on the internet and so on, out into Reading, where I bet 99% of the population have never heard of Creative Commons, let alone understand copyright law, let alone care about it. Oh, what about my notes? So, the main obvious thing we wanted to do is just to create a nice space in Reading where culture can unfold freely. To do this, we have a website, a Swish Drupal-based website where people can share their work, download their work and so on. And it's based around the remix concept, so the entire thing is based around if you remix somebody's work, you put it back up and it clearly marks what sources you've used and so on. It's rather like a kind of CVS or SVN but for art. And also lots of events and lots of things locally in Reading. Which means that we are able to touch people locally, because most people will be getting their culture when they go to the shop or a club or something. They'll see that we're putting on an event, they'll think that's cool, they'll go along and they'll get bombarded with all this copyright geekery. So we'll put up artwork on the wall and then we'll actually put the Creative Commons license notification underneath it and then have an explanation and so on. And this has been really successful. We've got over 600 works of art on the site and we've had hundreds of people coming to different events and so on. But what I really want to talk about more, just quickly, briefly sketch out, is one of the best things we've done is because we've been doing a really practical project, we've come up with lots of problems with Creative Commons. Not so much problems, issues and things to work around. The first one, the biggest one, is simply the learning curve, which you cannot underestimate, but consider that most people I talk to about Remix Reading don't understand copyright, they don't realise that you can't use stuff non-commercially however you like. They don't realise what it is to remix something. They don't understand the boundary between when you're allowed to do something and when you're making too much of a derivative use. They can't even begin to comprehend why it is the recording has 50 years copyright, the original composition has both of his life plus 70 years. How on earth do you find out whether something's out of copyright or not? Why is it that as an author I can quote extensively, but as a musician I can't sample, etc.? It's just completely blank face. And nor do they understand, most people understand the sort of dystopian future that we often like to paint of DRM and extended copyright and shrinking public domain. So they neither understand the problem, nor understand the solution, nor feel even vaguely compelled to get interested in it. So this is the kind of mountain that we're trying to overcome. Whereas if I talk to you about Creative Commons, you'd instantly get on, you'd understand and so on. People in the street is an entirely different prospect, and so we've been able to talk face to face with them, which is really good. Helps a lot, because reading websites kind of dry and boring. One of the problems this introduces, though, is no matter how well we explain Creative Commons, one of the most vaunted points of Creative Commons is it gives you all this legal protection and makes it clear. You stick it up on the web and everyone knows what to do. Well, no, they probably don't. People will still go along, not understand it, and just take it and use it, and we've already found this happening. We've even found people putting up stuff on Remix Reading where they've taken something that's obviously not public domain and then mixed it into their work, not understanding they couldn't do it. We've had people remixing other work from the site, releasing it under a license that is incompatible with the previous one because of the share alike clause, which is a real pain in the ass, but also quite good. Because you get people saying non-commercial share alike, some people say commercial share alike, are totally incompatible, and all of a sudden you can't remix the two. And people coming onto it, that just seems totally against the spirit of the project. It's like, hang on a sec, I meant to be able to use this stuff, but I can't. So I can't do what I want to do. I have to go back and contact the authors individually. Basically it becomes extremely complex, and this is something that maybe we can talk about a bit, is that you can have something that seems legalistically very, very simple, but when you put it into the social and political space, which is Rufus said, what we're doing with Creative Commons, it's extremely complex. And it's just open to all kinds of misinterpretations and problems and so on. And so to me, if we want to If we want Creative Commons and other free culture initiatives to be relevant, they have to be universal. Anything that's just for geeks is, to me, totally uninteresting. It has to be universal. It has to be something that affects the whole of society, or at least anyone who wants to. And we can do that, but it's just a matter of more advocacy, building better tools, building better understandings of it, and trying to educate people more, and do far more grassroots activism of the kind that I'm really excited to be doing now, Boothus and Free Culture. There you go.
So that just leaves Steve Coast to talk about OpenStreetMap.
Is it possible to get a website up on that Delta?
Yep.
Hello. Yeah, OpenStreetMap.org. So, hello, my name is Steve Coast. I'm going to talk about this website, which is called OpenStreetMap. The idea behind this is that maps in the UK aren't free, as they are in the US. In the US, things are public domain. Here, everything's copyright with the Ordnance Survey. And so, if you want to do anything with maps, you have a problem. Imagine Wikipedia when it started, if you wanted open entries on turtlefish or something. But you have to write to Britannica for permission to do that. You have to do that with any map you use in the UK, pretty much. So, do you mind just thinking about that? Grab map, just that thing on the right, the button on the right with the spectrums. So, the idea is to make maps like that, using freely available data, which in the beginning meant walking around with GPS units. You walk around with this GPS unit, it collects track points, like cancelling bread or dropping bread. You put that into an open format, upload it onto the website, you draw lines on top, vectors on top to say this is Baker Street, which is right there, this is Marlborough Road, and so on. You connect these things together, give them metadata, such as it's one way, two way, so on. And then you draw this stuff on top of a pretty Landsat image. The background satellite imagery is free. The other way of doing it is convincing people to give you other higher resolution aerial imagery. Hello? Yeah, so if you convince people to give you high resolution imagery, then you can draw streets on top like that. And as you can see, we're sort of starting to get somewhere in London. Just recently, we've been talking to a courier company who have GPS units on all of their couriers, and they were throwing this data away until very recently. They have something like 300,000 GPS points a week, and so I've got a funky poster here to show you that this isn't totally just out there, that you can get data. So, you probably can't see this too well, but if you imagine that thing. My wonderful assistants. Okay, so Regent's Park was up on the screen. You can see Regent's Park up here, Hyde Park, and various bits of London, the river, and so on. And this is just 1 week's worth of data. So all we need is people to take this and draw on top of it. Now, the way the website works is you have this static map that shows you the current state of the map. Then you hit edit. You go to an applet that allows you to draw lines, points of interest, such as tube stations, blah, blah, blah. And then this all gets rendered. There's an open API to get all the data, and then you convert, and you get as big as Wikipedia. That's the idea. So it's a wiki format. The sharp end of trying to create content, I suppose. And I hope the applet will load. So the current idea for us is to get to version 1.0 within about 6 weeks. So all the stuff I'm talking about, you can actually do it. Don't hit that button. The reason I said that is it takes a while. You can see that now the map looks slightly strange because it's grabbing the vector data which you can edit. But behind that, the grey stuff, that's the actual GPS tracks where people have been driving around and it's dropping points. That data is kind of big and large and uncompressed at the moment, which is why it takes a second. So there you can see the bottom of Regent's Park, Marlborough Road, Inner Circle, Outer Circle, and so on. And you can see that people have been drawing vectors on top, and there aren't ways at the moment of telling it which street a vector belongs to, but give it 6 weeks and we'll be there. And just an appeal for any of your skills. We need coders, HTML people, designers, everybody. It's an open project, all CC licensed, so I guess you can figure out most of the rest. Thank you.
Right, so just to kind of like get the discussion going, there's a few things that I've been thinking about that I'd like to ask the panel. And the first one really is a lot of these projects depend upon manpower and getting people involved, and not just kind of communicating the idea, but getting people to actually act upon that idea. So how do we do that? How do we get people engaged in these sorts of projects? Who's going to give that support?
Well, I think probably Tom and Rufus and Tom are going to be the ones that can talk about it really specifically. Is it live?
Oh, yeah, it is.
Yeah. But certainly, the reason I grabbed the mic is because I'm literally thinking about this at the moment. It's my big, huge problem. How do I get an entire world to somehow do this? Which it clearly says on my job description is my job, is to try and get the whole world using Creative Commons. And I actually think it's about doing some good old-fashioned marketing thinking, which is not usually a word that we use very much in kind of activism circles. But I'm all for embracing marketing and kind of learning from the marketing sphere. And one of the things, of course, that they do very, very well is that they identify spectrum of engagement. They identify where do different groups sit in terms of their engagement with this. And they talk a lot about sort of cradle to grave marketing strategies too. Get them young. And chances are that they will take it through the rest of their life and infect their children. So I have a slightly longer term sort of approach to this. And so I think one of the things that we need to do is we actually need to understand many of the issues that Tom talked about. You know, we, I think, have an appreciation for many of the issues, but that is an appreciation that has grown over time. We've taken the effort to learn about it. There's been a reason for us to do that. And I think we have yet to be in a position where we adequately find the reasons and the motivations for everyone else to make that effort. And it is an effort. You know, getting your head around copyright, I wouldn't inflict it on my worst enemy, you know, let alone somebody that I want to encourage to share their creativity with me and with others. So I think we've got a long way to go to find those trigger points and those motivations, but I think that's the first thing that we need to do.
I don't know. Certainly, one thing I would say is almost don't talk about copyrights, and don't talk about. I mean, I don't think many people come to open source or anything else because they're interested in necessarily immediately in kind of ethical or legal framework. They come to it because they want to write code or they want to use a piece of software, and that open source piece of software is good or it allows them to modify it or whatever. And so I think the biggest thing is to actually do projects that people can engage with. I mean, particularly artists is a classic example. You know, they're not going to be interested in copyright itself. They're interested when it intersects with their life in some meaningful way. And I mean, just one story the other day was there was someone I knew who wanted to get a kind of a new wireless music system. And she was really annoyed that she wasn't going to be able to play her iTunes music on it because of the DRM incompatibility. And the sad thing is, one way that can go is to go, the EC should mandate, you know, mandatory standard DRM system. But it also is someone thinking about, hey, actually, a bunch of law and a bunch of technology I never think about is affecting my life and what I can do. And I think the big thing is to find a way at that moment to give them something to do or something to engage with to pull them in a bit further. Because I think we're engaging more and more with these issues, but I think very much you have to give people a project that lives in it, that touches something in their life. And I think talking directly about the legal side of it is not a winner. But I think everyone agrees on that one.
Yeah, quickly. Yeah, you stole my thunder. I'd also add, because my background, well, I came across free software because I was interested in philosophy, and I came into this sort of activism because I used to do environmental and trade activism, so I'm wrong end of the spectrum in that sense. But I think the main thing is, as Rufus said, but more specifically about is the grassroots. Because one thing I think has really been neglected in this sort of work in the UK is it's always top down. It's always like, hey, let's start an organisation, let's get our legal shit sorted out, oh, we're now an official organisation with a bank account, blah, 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 blah. Let's run a few campaigns about copyright, as Rufus said. And then what the hell happens? Nothing. They don't engage anybody. And it's not like it's... The emphasis is more on we're interested in geeking out about these issues than on let's do something. And to me, the FFAI was the turning point when an organisation that was doing very geeky and boring things managed to get people involved because it said, if you come and offer help, this is what you can do. I mean, it wasn't great today, but there were people, including myself and Rufus and others, who ended up going to Brussels. We met MPs. There were large numbers of people adding their testimony on project innovation and so on. And this is basically my approach to it. It's not that people are apathetic, it's that we're bad at getting them to understand the issues. So it's a matter of, in activist parlance, bridging frames and being able to get other people so that they understand what we're talking about and we make it relevant to them, as Rufus says, and then they'll just get involved.
Yeah, hello. So my comments would be that getting people involved, I think we must have all had the Wikipedia conversation with someone. Where you first share the Wikipedia and they're like, what, it's free? What, you can edit it? Anyone? It's those kind of conversations you have to have with people over and over again to get them to understand, and then they can hopefully have it with 500 of their friends and so on to get the idea across. And I think the hard technical aspect of getting people involved is to lower the barriers to entry. Wikipedia is about as low as you can go, I think, on allowing people to give content without letting you sort of mail some paper to them. So lowering the barriers to entry.
Did we have any questions from Jeremy?
Yeah, can I speak close to the question? I'm sorry if it's a bit geeky and not
That's
accurate
fine.
enough, but do you see your map system as being purely and simply a replacement for the Ordnance Survey, which is available without copyright issues, or do you see it as offering further levels of service or availability?
I think you can go way beyond. Yeah.
I think so. What are they?
Yeah, I think you can go way beyond the OS. First of all, the OS will always have its domain because I don't think people want to map to sort of sub-centimetre resolution because the OS has extremely high detail where they know where this window is and stuff like that. But then we can go far beyond them with all the metadata, such as Wikipedia goes far beyond Britannica with current events, for example. We can update our maps instantly. If you look at OS maps, they're often wrong, or they have purposeful mistakes to catch you out copying their maps. So you have the timeliness, but you also have all the metadata, and the guy to talk to is Ben, because he has lots of metadata issues. So people putting their own events on a map, which you just can't do with Ordnance Survey, and adding things that the OS won't add either. So the big comparison is between Wikipedia and Britannica. People will want authoritative maps, but most people who understand the issues will be completely happy with, hopefully, OpenStreetMap maps. But we've got a way to go before we can get there.
Do you steer people in particular metadata directions, or do you encourage people to do?
Okay, so one of the cartographers in the group want us to do very hard defined categories. So this motorway is a Class C road in England, an autobahn is something different and so on. I don't think that's ever going to work. It's one of these things that you get in free projects. Should we be all top down about it, or should we just let things emerge? And I'm happy to let things emerge. And in that vein, when you give streets and points metadata, it's completely free form. You give them key values. So it's completely up to anyone to do what they like. And then the idea on top of that is that you can make the map renderer display what it likes. So you can say things of type motorway are coloured blue, and you have all of this as metadata that people can edit. But again, it's going to be a little way before we actually get to that point.
Yeah, I'm delighted that somebody said barrier to entry is a key phrase, because I think I've just literally yesterday been in a situation where a project to catalogue a community's knowledge essentially failed because the stack of licensing, actually being able to use a wiki, what the heck is that? What's markup? All that whole stack of stuff that you have to overcome is too big. I think we are chipping away at it, but Wikipedia is not simple enough to use for most people. I really don't believe that anymore. I did last week, I don't this week. Maybe I'm a bit bruised. We're getting there, but I think there's still a very long way to go to make it genuinely useful to people outside this room.
Do you have a question, or is it?
No, it's just an observation that I think.
I would agree with you.
In terms of the open map, do you see any crossover with the people who are mapping cell phone towers and cell IDs, and people who are mapping the old war driving thing of mapping access points?
Absolutely. That's what started it off just over a year ago when this thing all kicked off, was that if you go to, for example, San Francisco and you want a map of Wi-Fi points near cafes, it's very simple. It's very simple now in the UK because we have Google Maps, but back then you wanted a map of wireless nodes in London and it was just dots on a grid, which was not particularly helpful. So there's an awful lot of crossover with a lot of very different people who want maps. There's some guy in Bristol who's mapping good skating areas in Bristol. There's a guy in OpenStreetMap who's mapping good walks in the New Forest. There's so many different types of people who want to be able to create and edit their own maps.
I'm just curious, if you're using a technique of dumping raw GPS points from people walking about, that then is tied into a laptop, and it's very easy with a laptop to then pick up Wi-Fi information at the same time and dump that at the same time.
Yeah, that half of the problem's all been done. It's the maps underneath it that are the problem. Yes, there's already freely available software, just plug in and go and plug your Wi-Fi card in and a GPS, and it just records it, even uploads it to the server automatically for you.
Wireless-London, there's a whole group, in fact, Joe Walsh and various people working, I think, with Steve to some extent as well, doing Wi-Fi mapping in London and trying to actually get a mesh over London for using this kind of stuff. So, yeah, do check it out.
I've got a question for Paula. Just in terms of science, but I guess also wider, my understanding is that, especially in areas of R&D and academia, there's quite entrenched ways of lodging patents and research. Are you making any approaches on funds on bigger commercial companies or universities, etc.?
Yeah, we are, but I always have to be really careful because we are really the Johnny-come-latelys to this space. So I always want to acknowledge that there are lots of people out there who are tackling this issue, particularly within the academic sphere, and really trying to change the kind of the culture. But the one thing I would point out is that I sort of balk a little bit at the entrenched. It's actually not that entrenched. If you look at the way that the scientific community has traditionally worked, the entrenched way of working is actually to share, to be extremely open, to facilitate sort of the classic building on the shoulders of others. That's how the scientific domain has traditionally worked. It's a quite recent development for the scientific community to actually want to lock their stuff up. And so in some respects it's about sort of trying to reopen and re-educate the scientific community before they actually lock things down so much that actually the scientific process itself, and many argue that the scientific process is already seriously under attack. So I would question entrenched is probably my first thing. And as I said, yes, that is one of the areas that we're very interested in, but I want to reiterate again, we are not the kind of the leaders in this space.
I've got a question, because you said don't start with the legal stuff when you talk about Creative Commons. The problem is sooner or later you have to deal with it. And I do a lot of work in government, and we've got people now all hyped up and excited about the idea of open content, and now they say, next meeting we'll bring the lawyers, and we're not lawyers, so now we're sort of in a very painful situation of either having to pay ourselves for some legal advice, or I don't know if you guys can help us with that kind of stuff.
I remember Creative Commons. I mean, I think, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know if you're a member of the CC-UK list, for example, but that would be the first place to ask. And I know there are several lawyers on that list, actual lawyers. There are also several people, academics, involved with Creative Commons who'd be very, very willing to help. So absolutely, I mean, that's great. I mean, once you've got to the point that you want to ask the Z question, wonderful, because I don't think that's that hard to overcome. And it's amazing. I actually met a lady the other night who was asking about, she was doing a training video for lawyers generally, and she wanted someone to talk about Creative Commons in it because it was now becoming relevant, which was wonderful. So I think that, yeah, please just ask.
A couple of lawyers I know who are interested, they're work in Belgium. There is no real support there. They're desperate to get some kind of training or.
Come and talk to me afterwards. I'll hook you up with the Belgian CC folks.
You're talking to the right person.
Okay, any more questions? Yes.
Something that came up several times in the talks was the complexity of Creative Commons licenses and their interaction. And I think Paula mentioned this idea of computer assistance with the interaction between the licenses. Now, clearly, the further you push this, the closer you get to DRM. So I was wondering whether the panel had any opinions on how far down that road we should be going and how far we should push this.
Please, I'll start. I make a very, very careful distinction about DRM and DRE, so digital rights expression. One tries to manage, and one just tells you, and you choose what you want to do with that knowledge. And I think that should apply at the machine level as well. Again, there are people much more able to talk on this subject than I am. And I think when we sort of talk about the multiplicity of licensing in the Creative Commons world, it's always an extremely difficult subject. And the reason it is extremely difficult is, and for me personally it's extremely difficult, is because I absolutely believe in the creator's right to choose how they want their material to be used. And so Creative Commons developed a set of licenses that gave a lot of flexibility to the creator or the author to be able to choose how they wanted to do that. The flip side of that is exactly the issues that Tom raises, which is around interoperability, being able to reuse material from various sources. And also we face genuinely philosophical criticism as well. Many people in the FLOSS environment think that the licenses should carry an ideology and as such should mandate one particular type of license as being that type of license. And again, personally, I'm always very, very wary of sort of moving into the territory where a license mandates an ideology. Again, for me, choice is the ideology. So I think the challenge for us is to actually educate people as to the consequences of the choices that they make. Making sure that they understand that when they choose a non-commercial share-alike, that means that people who want to mix our material with a commercial share-alike are not going to be able to. So constantly reiterating the kind of education process around choice.
Do I have time to add something?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think two things, which is one, the experience of FLOSS stuff is there is going to be a splintering of licenses, and you can see that already happening, which is sad because it does construct. But then you also conversely have aggregation where certain licenses become the dominant ones. And I think to aid that, I don't know, there's a lot of controversy over this open source initiative and its definition of openness and stuff. But I think something similar may happen with open knowledge, open content, of a set of principles. And then you can say, well, okay, if you want to have a particularly, extra license, like a Perl artistic license or something, but it doesn't make you incompatible with the fundamental ones, because I think that's the issue. And one thing is the BBC's Creative Archive project, the difficulty there is, that license, if you use the share-alike there and the share-alike on Creative Commons, you can't mix them and so on. And that's a real balkanization of content that we want to avoid. And if you can say, well, you can have your own license because organizations want that, but if you sign up to these set of principles, you know that they're going to fit together. That might be one thing. But I don't think, I don't know, in open source, I think correct me if wrong, it's about 150 licenses and counting that are open source approved. It's a huge number. I think GPL has been, what Jim was saying, like BSD are way out in front. But that is going to happen. You get people kind of saying, I want a 2-year delay, I want a 5-year delay, I want to be able to let Scottish bagpipers only remix my stuff and stuff like that,
I'm going to take a big exception to two things that was being said. First of all, creators shouldn't have the right to dictate how their stuff is used. The thing I like about Creative Commons is it encourages people to do that less than the always reserved copyright. Ideally, I mean, if people could be financially compensated or the people who are still creating, they'd have no protection. That's my personal opinion, but I think that's unrealistic. What I think we should be thinking about here is not, do we want to sort of mess around with legal licenses and having fun, and as Rufus said, this does happen so much in the free software world. Somebody says, oh, I want to slightly change the full artistic license because I've got some extra clause I want to put in about my branding or something. To me, Creative Commons is as complicated as it should ever get, and it's extremely simple, but it's also, it's still quite complicated. BBC Creative Archive was the most stupid decision I can imagine, because what we're saying to people is you can freely distribute and use cultural objects. You can take this video and you can put some music over it and so on. And yet, all of a sudden, you can't. I mean, what is the point? Why did they have to slightly modify it for the BBC? It's craziness. And anyone who makes any more licenses is going down that road. The only problem with the opinion I just expressed, dialectic nonsense, is that there are problems with Creative Commons, and people have raised genuine objections that I haven't find compelling about whether or not it's actually a commons. I think it's still a privatised space, whether or not it's too complicated, whether or not it's too legalistic, and people on the street don't actually understand it, and so on. And there's always a temptation to say, okay, well, we're going to fix these problems with another license. One was released, a couple of very extraordinary licenses were released by a guy called David Berry recently that took a very different approach to Creative Commons. And it's the question of how can we have a good debate around these issues without getting lost in just just pointless legalistic discussion. Because at the end of the day, we have to be thinking, how do we make culture more free? How do we make it more relevant and accessible to people? And is this legal stuff just getting in the way?
Right. Any more questions? I'm going by my watch, not my clock, so I think we can squeeze another one in. Okay.
Yes, Andrew Nicholson, British Computer Society Open Source Specialist Group. It's a question mainly aimed at the science people and the mapping people. And I love the lawyers, don't you? When you come across resistance, you probably know you're getting somewhere. And I'm wondering if anyone has deployed the little-known thing called the Access to Environmental Information Regulations. If not, I recommend you read it. It's a short, sweet piece of law. Implements the European directive. And it basically says that any entity in the universe can have free access from any public body in Britain and Europe to any information about any land, water, building, piece of life, anywhere in the universe. I used to be an anti-road activist, and I knew that local authorities were reluctant to release mapping, traffic information and so on. But if you can integrate local authority information with maps, if you can get public science information and use that by squeezing it out of them using these rules, you get somewhere. It's quite easy to go to court and use these rules. Is anyone familiar with that?
Well, I know, on that vein, you might be outright to know about the Inspire piece of legislation, geo legislation, which is going through now, because unfortunately, like a lot of this stuff, it starts out sounding good, and then it's got cost recovery written all over it. So just to make a piece of translation for everyone in this room, cost recovery equals monopoly pricing, right? That is what it means. It means the person who produced the data can charge whatever they want, basically, to recover their costs, which only they know. So one of the things that always happens here, I have to say scarily, is so much of this stuff is going through the EU now. This is like software, so much of this stuff is no longer national. And I don't know, Inspire's got very little coverage. Again, there's Joe Walsh in the back of his room is leading kind of like an open geodata manifesto on the policy side of this. So we'd be really interested to hear about this legislation and how we could push to get. I mean, even on Inspire modified, it's already through first reading, but stuff to be done, and that's very interesting. Thank you.
Right, I think that's genuinely all we have time for. Thank you very much, and thank you to the panel. Before we all go, I do have an announcement. If there's a Miranda Lee around, she's lost her bus pass and it's downstairs. So thank you very much.